Hello and welcome to another edition of Local Heroes here on WKFK TV7, coming to you tonight from the GI Museum in Gaucher. Tonight we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. Mr. Kuykendall survived the sinking of the USS Tullabee, and what's significant about that is the Tullabee has a memorial, or a Tullabee-based memorial in Ocean Springs at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Welcome to the show, Mr. Cliff Kuykendall.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuykendall, the first question I like to ask is how you got into the Navy in World War II.
Well, I was living in Wichita Falls, Texas. I graduated from high school in 1941, and I was 17 years old on August 31st, 1941, and I'd always wanted to go in the Navy. I wanted to join the Navy and see the world. And after I became 17, I went down to the recruiting station, took the written examination, and was sent from Wichita Falls to Dallas, Texas, 150 miles southeast of there, where I was sworn into the Navy.
Was this prior to December the 7th, 1941?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
So you were actually in the Navy when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
And were you in boot camp at that time?
Yes, I was in boot camp at Norfolk, Virginia, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
It sounds like we're getting bombed right now. This rainstorm's coming through here.
At that time, the Navy had a waiting list, and they said that they had a waiting list, and they put me on the waiting list, and I was on the waiting list about 2 or 3 months, and then I was called up to report to Dallas, Texas, to take a physical. If I passed it, to be sworn in.
But you were actually in training at boot camp on December the 7th.
Yes.
Do you remember that day, and how did you find out about the Pearl Harbor being bombed?
Well, it just started out as more or less a rumor, how rumors circulate. It was first known in Washington, D.C. Norfolk, Virginia was not very far from Washington, D.C. And it was first known there, to the best of my knowledge, because the times were different and everything, and between the United States, the East Coast, and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And it started circulating around. The Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. The Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. And a lot of people were saying, I knew this was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen.
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
And, oh yes, I knew
okay.
where Pearl Harbor was, in Hawaiian Island, Oahu. And people were saying, we're at war with Japan. We're at war with Japan. I knew it was coming. And then they, when they found out that they labeled it a stab in the back, that it was a dirty blow and all that old stuff, and it aroused a tremendous amount of anger and patriotism, I might add.
But you were 17. You were 17 at this time.
17 years old.
And you were in the United States Navy, just in the United States Navy. How did you feel about the possibility of going to war at 17 years old? I mean,
well,
it had to be. I know you were patriotic, and it may have stirred some anger in you. But 17 years old, how did you feel like going?
The minimum age to join the Navy then, I guess all military services, was 17, and then at that time you had to get your next of kin's written consent before you could join, and your parent or your next of kin had to sign a special form giving their permission for you to enter the service. And at that time, I can honestly say it didn't worry me in the least. I guess when you're young, you think you'll live forever.
Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. So right after Pearl Harbor, you're in basic training, boot camp, and you get out of boot camp, and then you decide you're going to go to sub school?
No, I didn't at that time. When I graduated from boot camp, they sent me to gunnery school. They needed gunner's mates, evidently. They sent me to gunnery school at a place called Little Creek, Virginia, which is not very far. It's part of the Naval Operating Base where Norfolk, the base, is located. And after I went through gunnery school, I was assigned to surface ships, and I've been on a surface ship for a long time. And a pal and I that we palled around together, his name was John Hardy. He was from Colorado. And we were out on the town one evening and everything, and we saw a few submarine sailors wearing the dolphins on their cuffs. And they had a lot of girls in tow. And Hardy suggested that, why don't we join the submarine service? They get 50% hazardous duty pay, and the girls are crazy about them.
There's two big incentives right there.
So at that time, the vessel I was on was at the Navy base in New Orleans, Louisiana, having some work done on it, and we went down and submitted a letter to join the United States Submarine Service.
But
Request.
you were, yeah. But prior to that, let's get back to the patrol craft you were on. You were operating in the Gulf of Mexico.
Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean.
And there's not been a lot written about it, not much history about it, but in talking to you earlier before the interview started, I found that there were a lot of German submarines in the Gulf of Mexico right off the shores of Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida.
Oh, yes, there were quite a few.
Did y'all ever chase any or hear of any?
Oh, yes, we had sonar gear, and we detected a lot of them, and the Germans at that time were using two types of submarines in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, the east coast of the United States. And the only one that could make the round trip from Germany or France, the base in France where they were operating, was a 9C submarine. It had the fuel to do it, to stay on the station a certain length of time. And the Germans also had a smaller submarine called a 7C. And it would have to be refueled to come all the way to the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean. And those submarines were refueled usually out in the middle of the Atlantic, where they in a good zone, and they called them milk cows. They were large German submarines and INDs that were fuel refueling submarines.
Basically
they would refuel
a tanker.
a 7C submarine. So they could operate in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean off the east coast of the United States.
So you decide that you're going to get some dolphins on your sleeve and more money in your pocket, and you submit a letter to go to sub school. And that happens for you, obviously.
Yes. We were in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and the yeoman called me in and says, Kuykendall, he said, get your gear together. He said, you've been accepted for submarine school. I'd forgotten all about it. And I said, I've been selected for submarine school? And he said, yes. He said, you're being sent to New London, Connecticut. And, well, back in the ZI. And he said, there's a Navy transport leaving here tomorrow, and he says, you're going to be on it. It's going to Norfolk, Virginia. And the Navy transport did go to Norfolk, Virginia. And I was unloaded in Norfolk, Virginia, and put on a train. They went up to New London, Connecticut.
And then you went to sub school.
I went to sub school.
You'd been trained in gunnery for your surface craft. What was your skill, or what did you train for on the submarine? Did you stay in gunnery?
Gunner's mate.
You were a gunner's mate on the sub.
Right.
Which meant that when the sub surfaced, you went to surface action and you went to the deck gun?
Well, at that time, in World War II, the submarines, American submarines, had deck guns and machine guns and 20 millimeters, and later on in the war, they armed them with 40 millimeters also. But we had Thompson submachine guns also, and revolvers and pistols. And the gunner's mate's job was to take care of the guns. but that gunner's mate also had to learn how to do just about everything there was to be done on that submarine. He had to learn how to do other jobs. He had to qualify, and at that time, if you went out on war patrol, they would give you 2 war patrols to qualify, and you had to study also. You had to fill out forms, make drawings of the equipment and stuff like that, and it wasn't easy.
Well, it's my understanding that submarines had small crews, so everybody on there had to know everybody else's job in case something happened to one of the guys, that you could take over immediately and do his job. That had to be a tremendous amount of learning and a short learning curve on your part.
It's true, and the only place to study really was to make the drawings and everything was the crew's mess, and it was small, and there'd be someone in there wanting to eat or something like that, or get a snack, and you was in there trying to make drawings and whatnot. And according to what rate you held, you had other duties to perform. Like I stood lookout. I was a gunner's mate, and I stood lookout watches. And my battle station submerged was on the stern planes. They had bow planes and stern planes to operate the bow planes and the stern planes, and you had to learn other jobs. And when it come time for you to qualify, a commissioned officer would take you through that submarine. He'd ask you, "What's that? What's that? How do you operate it?" and so forth and so on. And I have often wondered how I qualified. I've often wondered. I didn't know I was that smart, but I still don't know. But I qualified, but I've often wondered how.
Mr. Kuykendall, we're going to have to stop right there and take a short break. Don't go away. We'll be back with more local heroes here on WKFK TV 7. Welcome back to Local Heroes, where we're talking to Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. And Mr. Kuykendall, before we went to the break, we were just talking about an officer having to take you to all the compartments and spaces on the submarine, and he would ask you about different pieces of equipment or different operating systems, and you had to explain it all, and then you became certified as a submariner.
Right, qualified.
Qualified, excuse me, as a submarine.
Then you got eligible to wear the dolphins.
And then you got the dolphins on your sleeve.
Yes, I could put the dolphins on my sleeve.
You got more women and more pay, right, at that point?
Well, by then I realized that wasn't the case.
Oh, okay. So you're qualified as a submariner, and you get assigned to what submarine?
Well, I was at USS Tullabee.
Tullabee was your first submarine?
I served on another submarine for one patrol, and then I was assigned to the USS Tullabee.
So then you go to the Tullabee, and you made a war patrol on the Tullabee?
I made one war patrol on the USS Tenosa. SS-283. I filled in.
Okay.
And yeah, I knew I wasn't going to stay on it.
You knew you weren't going to stay on the...
I knew I wasn't going to stay on it, and I went back to the Tullabee.
And you would leave out of Pearl Harbor for your patrol?
Well, the Tullabee operated out of Pearl Harbor, and they made patrol out of Pearl Harbor and out of Midway. We were overhauled in Midway once. Midway Island, northwest of Pearl Harbor. They had a submarine base there, usually a tender.
And your typical submarine patrol lasted how many days? A month? 2 months?
They would, as a whole, last anywhere from 65, maybe sometimes 80 days at the most. Every patrol I served on did not last 80 days. They were less than that. It had everything to do with the amount of torpedoes you fired, and you could only operate so long because of fuel consumption.
And probably food.
If you had to operate at a high rate of speed and use more diesel fuel.
Now, on the third patrol that you served on the Tullabee, something happened to that ship. Could you tell us the circumstances about and kind of give us a little walkthrough of what happened? What the night was it at night when the Tullabee was sunk?
The Tullabee was lost on its fourth war patrol.
On the fourth war patrol.
Fourth war patrol.
But was the ship lost at night?
It was lost around 3:15 in the morning.
Yes, sir. Could you give us a kind of a walkthrough of what happened that night and where you were and what you were doing when that happened?
Well, we were to take part in what they called Operation Desecrate, which was the first carrier airstrike on the Palau Islands, which were due March the 30th and 31st. This carrier task force would be coming from Majuro Island and the Marshalls, and they would be sailing south of Truk, the Caroline Islands. And the Palau Islands, which actually I found out later were surrounded by 12 American submarines. 6 of them were from Pearl Harbor, and 6 of them were from Australia. And our main job was to sink enemy ships, Japanese ships, who we thought would be fleeing the islands to get away from the carrier airstrike, and to also pick up American pilots, Navy pilots, that were shot down or went down for mechanical reasons or something, to pick them up, rescue them. And that was our 2 main reasons. And around 8 p.m. On west of the 180th meridian, we picked up a radar contract. We knew the Japanese ships would be heading north. A lot of them would be heading north toward Japan. We picked up a radar contact around 24,000 yards, which was long distance. And it was around 8 p.m. And we started tracking this convoy, and we tracked it. Our patrol area was northwest of Babelthuip, which was the largest island in the Palau group. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, I imagine we were around between 80 and 100 miles northwest of Babelthuip in very deep water. And around shortly before, I went on lookout. Before we went on lookout, 15 minutes before we were due to go on lookout, we had to go to the conning tower compartment and put on the red goggles. That would get your eyes adjusted to night vision. And then you would go to the bridge. You'd stand underneath the hatch leading to the bridge and say, look out to the bridge, sir, and the OD or whoever would say, come on up. He would assign you to your lookout post. And I went up around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was told to man the starboard after lookout alongside the periscope shears. And around 3:15, this particular night we went in, and the submarine had made several runs into the convoy prior to that, but it was a very dark night, and they were attacking by radar. And we went in, and we fired 2 bow torpedoes. I knew that they had fired them because you could hear the swish, you could feel the submarine shake. And we had slowed down considerably, and the decks were almost awash, so we could make a quick dive if necessary. And it was very dark. And I'd say about 25 minutes after the first torpedo was, about 25 seconds after the first torpedo was fired, just seemed like a red film passed over my eyes. And I didn't hear an explosion. I didn't feel an explosion, but it knocked me mostly unconscious, And when I came to, it seemed like I was about 100 feet up in the air, and I looked down, and I saw the stern of the Tullabee drop beneath the surface of the ocean. And I just was more or less in a state of shock. I didn't know what was happening. And the next time, when I came to, I was almost drowned, and I was submerged in the ocean. And I fought my way to the surface, and the surface was covered with diesel oil. And I had swallowed enough diesel oil that I could taste it for a year after that. And I heard voices for about 8 or 10 minutes. I couldn't distinguish what they were saying. Now, there were 6 men on the bridge, including me, 5 besides me. And I have to say, this is the reason I'm still alive. When I was in the control room getting ready to go up to put on the red goggles, an electrician's mate, first class, come down the ladder. He'd been up on the bridge to see what he could see, you know, the Japanese ships. And he was carrying a life belt in his hand. The kind of life belts we wore would fasten around your waist, and they had a tube on them with a valve. You had to blow them up. Then you close the valve when you got enough air in them to keep you afloat. You had to. It didn't have. You couldn't do it automatically. You had to blow them up. And he told me, he said, "Cliff, take this. Here's your life belt." I had never worn a life belt on a submarine before in my whole life. On when I was topside. I said, "I don't want that." He said, "Oh yeah, take it." I said, "No, I don't want it." He said, "No, go ahead and take it. You might need it." So I just took the life belt and fastened it around my waist and forgot about it. And then when I was struggling in the ocean to stay alive, I suddenly remembered I had that life belt. And I unfastened it and took it up and blew on it. And it took me a long time to get enough air in it to where it'd keep me afloat. I never did. I only got it about half full. And that's what saved my life. But I never got a chance to thank the man that gave me that life belt.
He went down with the ship.
He went down with the Tullabee.
What a story. Wow. Amazing. Well, Mr. Kuykendall, we're just about out of time for this show, and regrettably we're going to have to end this one, but we're going to pick up with this story, and I'm going to ask you a whole lot more about it, be assured of that, on our next edition of Local Heroes. So you can't miss that one. Folks, you got to hear the rest of this. Join us again next week for more of Local Heroes and the rest of this story. Welcome to another edition of Local Heroes. This is the second show with Mr. to get topside.
Yes.
Did you happen to notice or see or remember any of those guys in there as you went by?
Well, I remember before I went on lookout, I went in the galley and drank a cup of hot chocolate. And I walked through the control room, and I saw Ensign Butler in the control room, and we spoke. And Ensign Butler had just made ensign after 3rd Patrol. He was an enlisted man prior to that. And I understand he used to be on the USS Seawolf, SS-197. I went up in the conning tower compartment and put on the red goggles to get ready for night vision. And I remember that the executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Duncan, was in the conning tower, and he was speaking up through the hatch to the skipper that was on the bridge. But there was a radar technician, first class, named Alan Knopper. Also, he was assisting out Lieutenant Irving that was on the TDC, the torpedo data computer. And there was a chief ship steward in there by the name of Schoenrock. He's one of the oldest men on the Tullabee. And I understand that he used to be in the German Merchant Marine, and he jumped ship in the United States and just stayed in the United States and wound up in the United States Navy. I do remember he had tattoos all over his body. And the fellow on the bridge was a fellow named Barcuzzi. He was an Italian. He was from New Jersey. And the officer of the deck was a Lieutenant J.G. named Peterson. And then the skipper's name, the commander, Frederick W. Vendepke. Now, there was 3 other lookouts on the bridge beside me. There were one up there before me. I do not know who they were. I do not know who I relieved. But who I relieved was relieved 15 minutes before I took his place, and he went down on the inside of the submarine after I relieved him.
And when the Tullabee was making the attack, you felt the torpedoes being released.
Yes, I could tell that they were being fired.
And shortly thereafter, you say you saw this red film pass by your eyes.
Now, we'll say that the last voice that I ever heard spoken on the Tullabee was a lookout, was right on the forward starboard lookout. I do not know who it was. I believe I know who it was. But he said, "There they go. We'll see what happens now." And that was the last word that I heard spoken by anyone on the Tullabee.
So there they go meant that you had released the torpedoes, and he was going to say, "We'll see what happens now."
Right.
But what happened was actually the Tullabee sank itself. One of its torpedoes went awry and came back and hit.
Well, it's evidently that from everything that could be dug up and everything, from all the knowledge that could be garnered, it had to be what they call an erratic circular run. One of our own torpedoes made an erratic circular run, and sometimes the gyro would foul up on them, sometimes the rudder would jam in the tube when they were fired. And it was a Mark 14 torpedo, and the submarines had had a tremendous amount of trouble with them prior to that, and in fact they caused trouble all during the war. And the Japs did not sink us, because the Japs, as they captured me, kept asking, "What happened out there? What happened out there?" If the Japs had sunk us, they would have bragged about it tremendously.
Let's go back to you're on the lookout, and then you say there was a tremendous red film that passed by you, but you didn't hear the explosion.
No.
So the red film must have been the explosion?
Well,
It passed by your eyes?
I don't know. It was just a red film, and I went unconscious. It just seemed like something bright red was dragged over in front of my eyes. And I went unconscious. Next thing I knew, I was suspended in the air.
And then you saw, from your being suspended in the air, the Tullabee actually going down.
I saw the stern of the boat, the Tullabee, drop beneath the surface of the ocean.
And when you get in the water, you swallow a bunch of diesel fuel, and luckily that electrician's mate had talked you into taking that life belt.
Yes, yes.
And then
electrician's mate first class.
you managed to inflate it about halfway, which basically kept you afloat. And you heard voices possibly in the night in the water?
I heard voices. I couldn't see them. I couldn't see any human beings. But I heard voices talking to one another, yelling at one another for about 8 or 10 minutes. Then all was silent. But not too long after I heard those voices, I saw the bow of the Tullabee sticking almost straight up in the air, and we had a 4-inch 50 gun mounted, deck gun mounted forward in the conning tower, and I saw it slipping beneath the ocean, and I knew it was going down with the stern.
Okay, so the Tullabee disappears into Davy Jones' locker. You're there all by yourself. It's nighttime. You're a long way from home. How do you feel?
Well, the first thing that entered my mind, actually, I can honestly say, was there goes my home, and I'm a long ways from home. And I was. And that was my home. And I knew that the depth of the water there, we were near the Marianas Trench. I knew that the depth of water where we were. Several hours later, I checked the depth of the water, and it was over 16,000 feet there, and we had gone northwest from there. So the depth of the Marianas Trench is the deepest part of the ocean. Of any ocean in the world, it's around 5 miles deep.
Now, earlier in our conversation, you told me that, this was before we rolled the tape, but you told me that you could actually feel the compartments of the Tullabee imploding as the ship went down underneath you.
Well, yes, I could feel the watertight compartments imploding. I could feel the vibration in the water, the vibration in my body, it imploding. And the test depth on those submarines was around 300 feet. They'd go a lot deeper than that. But of course, I have no idea what depth it was.
So the sun obviously has got to come up on you, and you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean by yourself. That's, I guess, when it really hits you that you're there by yourself. There's nobody else around when the sun comes up.
The only thing on the ocean when it got daylight, the only thing on the ocean was diesel fuel. The whole surface was covered with diesel fuel, and I was floating. Shortly after the sun did come up, it come up behind me, and I knew I was facing west toward the Philippine Islands, which were the nearest landmass outside of Palau. And I felt something nudge me in the back. And the first thing that entered my head was, oh, shark.
I would think
and I
so.
turned around and looked, and it was an American orange crate. And I knew it come off that submarine.
An orange crate that oranges had been in.
No oranges in it. I didn't see any oranges, but I saw an orange crate. And it had American writing on it, sun-kissed oranges.
And
they're an American product.
yes, they are. At last I heard. You have nothing as far as survival gear. All you have is this life belt. You still have your clothes on? Did anything get blown off?
Well, I had my underwear, and I had a pair of dungarees on, and a short-sleeved dungaree shirt. And when I come to in the water, which I regretted later, the first thing I done was take off my shoes and socks. That's what they taught us in boot camp. If you get in the ocean, take off your shoes and socks so you can swim better. And when I stayed barefooted for 2 months, when I walked barefooted for 2 months, I wished I'd have kept those shoes on. That's all I had on.
How long were you in the water all by yourself in the middle of the Pacific Ocean?
I would say around 7 hours.
7 hours, that's all. I was thinking days maybe.
Around 7 hours. I believe I was picked up by this old Japanese destroyer about 10 a.m., I believe. I believe it was about 10 a.m.
What kind of ship picked you up? A Japanese?
It was a Japanese Navy destroyer. Old. It was. I found out later the name of it. It was commissioned in the 20s, and it was one of the escorts of that convoy we were attacking. And it knew something happened, and it was staying around there. And I was looking out over the water, riding one swell up and one swell this and that. And I looked and I saw this ship over there. But I looked a little higher and I saw the Japanese Imperial battle flag flying from the mainmast, the rising sun. And I said, uh-oh. And shortly after that, I heard several shouts, which had to come from there, and they headed right for me.
So they must have seen you in the water.
They had to see me.
We're going to have to take a short break right here, Mr. Kuykendall. We'll be back with more of this interesting story here on Local Heroes. Don't go away. Welcome back to Local Heroes here on WKFK TV7. Tonight we're continuing our interesting conversation with Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. And we left off, Mr. Kuykendall, where you had been on the Tullabee, it was sunk, you were in the water, sunlight daylight hits, and suddenly you see a Japanese destroyer, Imperial battle flag flying from it, and they come right towards you. Then what happened?
They got within, I'd say, 500 or 600 yards of me and made a complete 360-degree circle around me, eyeing me over, I guess. And they started shooting at me. I noticed they were shooting at me with rifles and machine guns that was on the deck, and several bullets skipped off the water, and some of them nicked me, but none of them hit me really bad. And after they completed the circle, they sidled in alongside of me, starboard side 2, right side 2, and they threw one of these rope ladders over the side that the Marines used when they were invading,
Yes.
getting in boats, climbing down those rope ladders. And I just shook my head. I couldn't climb that thing. I was too weak. And I just slung my arms into it like that, and they dragged me up on the deck. And 2 Japanese sailors picked me up. And I was laying on the deck, picked me up, and I fell on the deck again. And they picked me up and dragged me and dragged me up. And this was an old Japanese destroyer, commissioned in the 20s, and it had a forward deck house and it looked like a 3-inch 50 deck gun mounted on top of the deck house. Then the bridge, open space between. And these Jap sailors were holding me by each arm to keep me upright, and 2 Jap naval officers come over there, and one of them could speak English, and he said, "You are the one that sank the Maru ship." Well, I didn't know it at the time, but Maru in Japanese means commercial ship. He said, "You are the one that sank the Maru ship," and he said, "You are going to die." And I wasn't scared. I just numb and excited or anything. And he was wearing a saber tucked in a scabbard, and that saber was almost as tall as he was. The end of it was the scabbard was almost dragging the holster was almost dragging the deck. And he took that saber out, and he was getting warmed up, and these 2 Jap sailors moved to each side. And that Jap swung that saber, and it went over my head. He was going to behead me upright, I guess. And he mumbled something in Japanese, and he picked up those 2 Jap sailors, picked me up again, and they jumped to each side. They were going to get hit with that saber, and I fell to the deck again. And after about 3 or 4 times of that, a voice rang out from the bridge. And I looked up there, and this officer up on the bridge, I guess he was a skipper, I don't know, and he yelled down there. And that Jap officer that was going to behead me put his saber back in the scabbard, and these 2 Jap sailors dragged me into the forward deck house and threw me on a mat. And shortly after that, a Jap come in there, speaking real softly and everything, and I noticed he was wearing a red cross on his left sleeve. He must have been a pharmacist mate or a corpsman, you know. And he gave me a sweet cup of tea. And he patted me on the head and said in English, "Everything will be all right." And the first thing that entered my head, "I sure hope you're correct."
So you're on this Japanese ship, and obviously they take you to Japan.
No.
They didn't.
No, they took me into the Palau Islands. They took me in to the Palau Islands, and it dropped anchor about, I heard the chain being released. They were dropped anchor, and they took me out on deck, and a launch came alongside, and they put me in that launch and took me to the dock. And I found out later that the ship that picked me up was IJN, Imperial Japanese ship, Navy ship, Wakataki. And I heard that it was escorting this convoy that we were attacking, and the hull was full of Allied prisoners. And they were going to take them to Japan. And on March the 30th, when that carrier strike started, that Wakataki Maru was sunk up the channel where you come in through the reef and come down an island. They took me to a building and put me in this building, some kind of a hangar. And they always had my hands. They had before I left the Wakataki, they had my wrist handcuffed. They always had my hands handcuffed in front of me.
And what did they do to you once they took you to the building? Did they just leave you there? How were they treating you?
I was there a few hours, and it seemed like, I don't know, and they come in there and slapped me around, beat me up, and took me to this building that there was a Japanese sitting behind a desk, and he could speak English, fluent English, and he wore the uniform of the Japanese naval officer. And the first thing he said, "What was the name of your submarine?" I said, "Sir, all I have to tell you is my name, rank, and serial number." And he smiled, and he asked me again, and he said, "What was the name of your submarine?" I said, I told him my name, my rank, and serial number. And then they took me in another room, and they started beating me up, and they broke both my little fingers, tortured me, and they took me back in there, and he said, "What was the name of your submarine?" And I said, "All I have to give you is according to the Geneva Convention, is my name, rank, and serial number, which I have already done." He said, "But listen to this," or something like that. He said, "Japan did not sign the Geneva Convention." He said, "We're going to get it out of you. You might as well tell us now."
And?
The next time I saw him, a few minutes after he started questioning me, it was early in the morning, shortly after daylight. The fighters started strafing, and the bombs started falling from the dive bombers. The Americans were hitting Palau.
Again?
I knew it was coming. That's the first time it hit it.
Oh, yeah.
That was early on March the 30th when it was due. That's the first time they'd been bombed by American carrier force. And they were strafing that building I was in, and the Japs disappeared and left me in there. And a bomb exploded near it, and it collapsed on top of me, and I lay there a while, and two they had what they call Japanese Marines on that island. I forget the name they call them. They were big Japs, and they were mean and tough, and they dragged me out of there and put me in another building, and all told, I remember counting 4 buildings that they blew up on me. And I said, "Well, they don't know I'm here." The dive bomber pilots didn't know I was there, so I didn't blame them.
No.
And finally, they come and got me, and but anyway, they wouldn't give me any water. And they had this last building I was in. It had a barrel in there, a metal barrel, and I often wondered what was in that metal barrel, whether it was some kind of fuel or water. And there was a Jap sentry watching me all the time, so I didn't turn the spigot. And an F-6F fighter came over strafing before the building collapsed, and a bullet, 50 caliber bullet, went right through that barrel. And he was shooting at 3 Japs that manning a machine gun in the top of a platform in a palm tree. He got all 3 of them. And I put my finger under the stream, and I put it to my lips, and it was water. And that's first water I'd had since it was a cup of tea, and I just laid there underneath that stream of water and just failed myself. And it's a good thing I did, because I didn't get any more water for about 8 days.
8 days.
That's right.
So they're attacking the islands. The Americans are. They're strafing it and they're bombing it, and you get buildings blown out from under you or all around you, and you're up underneath it. When the attacks were over, what did the Japanese do with you then?
Well, the last building that they dragged me out from under. Incidentally, I found out later that the island they had me on was the island they called Arakabesan, Arakasan. And the Japs had a seaplane base on the northeast corner and one on the southwest corner. I was on Arakabesan, and their headquarters on Korora Island and to the east. But I remember them dragging me out, and they had me. They always had me blindfolded, but it was always a light-colored blindfold, and I could see good through it. I could make out things through it. This white blindfold, and they these 3 Japs. There was 3 of them, and they all had rifles, and they were shoving me forward ahead of them, pushing me forward ahead of them. I was walking ahead of them. I guess they were hoping I'd fall off a cliff or something. I don't know. But I thought they were going to shoot me, because I turned my head and looked a few times, and they had their rifles pointed at me. And finally they took me up on top of this hill and tied me to a tree. And this time they took my handcuffs off of me, and they took the handcuffs off completely, and they tied me, my hands behind me, to this tree. And I can remember seeing the sun come up and go down three times before I was released from that. And I was working my bonds loose. I was going to try to escape. I was fantasizing, I guess, because I had nowhere to go. But I saw this house. All the houses over there, around where I was on stilts, and built on stilts. And I was going to go over there and climb under one of those houses. And a Jap truck full of hay and a mountain machine gun parked out there, not very far from me, and 2 Japs run over there. And when I saw them coming, I immediately put my hands back behind that tree, trying to make the look I was still tied. And a Jap come over there and looked behind that tree and moved around a little. He says, "Uh-huh." But anyway, they untied me and they took me up there and put me in that truck.
We're gonna have to stop you right there, Cliff. I hate to, but we're running out of time for this show. But don't miss the next one, because we're going to continue this very interesting story with Mr. Cliff Kuykendall, the only survivor of the sinking of the USS submarine Tullabee.
Each week.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Local Heroes, brought to you by WKFK TV7 in Pascagoula. We're coming to you from the GI Museum tonight. This is the 3rd show in our series with Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. He is the survivor, the only survivor, I might add, of the sinking of the USS submarine Tullabee. Mr. Kuykendall, when we left off on the last show, you were tied up to a tree, and you worked your hands loose, and the Japanese pulled up in a truck with a machine gun on it, and you actually put your hands back behind the tree, thinking, okay, I'm going to fake them off. But they came up and they looked at you and they said, "Uh-huh." And then what did they do?
They loaded me in the bed of the truck, and they took me down and dug out. And anyway, a couple of nights later, I was still in there. Nothing to eat or anything else. Food wasn't on my mind. But this Japanese naval officer, he stuck his head in the entrance, and he says, "You tell me the name of your submarine, I'll bring you a kiver." Well, he meant cover, blanket,
Okay.
but he pronounced it kiver. I didn't say a word. And he left. And the next day, two young girls stuck their head in the entrance. Both of them giggled and left. And several days later, I don't know when it was, they took me out of that dugout, and it was in April. They took me out of that dugout, and they loaded me in a car. And I remember going across a bridge over an inlet. And I remember walking out on the dock. And that Jap was with me. A Jap officer was with me. He was the only one. And he told me in perfect English, he says, you stayed behind my house. And I just got to thinking, you saved my life. And a few minutes later, a big Japanese flying boat landed in the bay and stopped, and it was the Emily flying boat, big Japanese foreign flying boat, and a boat was there, a launch, and he said, there you go. He said, get in the launch. He said, you're leaving on that. I said, airplane. I said, oh, good, I'm not leaving on a Japanese ship. I figured it'd be sunk if I was. Submarine get it. And he said, good luck. Like that. And I said, good luck to you, sir. He said, I'll need it. They weren't all bad. And they rode me, he gave me a package wrapped up in a Japanese newspaper of Japanese rice crackers. He called them kanepos. He said, here is kanepos. And I was carrying those kanepos in my handcuffed wrist, and they pulled me up in that airplane near the waist guns, the porthole waist guns, and everything seemed to be on the starboard side, the right-hand side. And the first thing that they done, when they pulled me up in there, is threw me over in the corner. A Japanese machine gunner, there was two of them. He threw me over in the corner, and that Jap took my kanepos. I never got them.
Oh.
And I found out later that the plane flew from the Palau Islands to Saipan. And they unloaded me in Saipan. They put me in a Navy brig, Japanese Navy brig on Saipan. And that's where I stayed until I was flown out of Saipan, not too long before the invasion of Saipan by the American Marines, and flown to what turned out to be Yokosuka, near Yokohama, Japan.
And you were in a POW compound there.
Right. After I arrived in Japan, they took me to a Japanese Navy interrogation camp they called Ofuna, which was southwest of Yokosuka. And I remember I was still barefooted. You know, it was cold in Japan then. It was raining. And I remember walking, took a trolley and walking down this road, and something huge loomed up. And it was a Buddha. And we walked right around that Buddha. It was, the roads went around each side of it, and down that hill there, and turned left, and there was Ofuna, Jap-Navy interrogation camp. And all they had was Navy, American Navy prisoners of war, and pilots, American pilots, and a few Australians. That's all they had. They had American Navy pilots, which included some Marine pilots also.
And what were you doing there? You said it was an interrogation camp. Were they still trying to find out what submarine you had been on?
Still interrogation. But actually, I went in there late in the afternoon, and the very next morning, I saw this tall, red-headed American. It looked like a white man. He walked in front of me and went like that. And he walked in the room. I wasn't allowed to leave my room. And he walked in front of me and called through the wall. He said, "My name is Red Bullard." He said, "I'm an American Navy pilot." He said, "Commander Fitzgerald wants to know whether you're a submarine man or a pilot." And I said, "Well, I can't tell you anything." I said, "How do I know who you are? You might be a spy." He said, "Oh, no, I'm not." He said, "I'm not a spy." He said, "I graduated from the United States Naval Academy, and I was an F-6 F pilot, and I forget now what carrier he was flying off of." He said, "I was shot down off truck when they made their first carrier airstrike on truck, I believe in February of '44. And I said, "Well, I'll think it over." I said, "I need a little more proof." And he left and come back, and he was taking a chance because the Japs had caught him there. They would have really laid him low. They'd have beat him up. No other prisoner supposed to talk to me. That was their policy. And he come back and he said, he told me, so I don't remember his exact words and everything. And I said, "Well, I'll tell you the name of it." He told me Commander Fitzgerald, and I said, "I'll tell you the name of it." And the next day he come back and he said, "Commander Fitzgerald had never heard of the USS Tullabee, but he said a radioman named Peterson off the Sculpin had." he was a radioman, he'd heard of the Tullabee. And he said, Commander Fitzgerald thought you might be a spy. But it was just routine that questions. Japanese naval officers would come out from Yokohama and question me. And the interpreter was a Japanese commander named Sasaki. And he could speak perfect English, and he was always bragging about going to the University of Southern California and living in California for many years. And I said, "If you liked it so much, why didn't you stay there?" He said, "Well, I come back to Japan to visit, and they wouldn't let me go back. They kept me here."
That's a good reason not to go.
And but our nickname, all those Japs had nicknames. The American prisoners had a nickname for him.
What was his?
Handsome Harry.
Handsome Harry.
Handsome Harry, and I was also in prisoner of war camp there. I made friends. I didn't smoke, and the Japs would give you one Japanese cigarette every morning, one every afternoon. And first thing I knew, this fellow was sitting alongside of me and trying to talk. He said, "If you talk back," he said, "look straight ahead." He'd sit a distance from me, and he'd talk straight ahead. And he introduced himself, and his name was Gregory Pappy Boyington. And he said, "If you don't want your cigarettes, I'd like to have them." And he was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, that got shot down.
We all know who Pappy Boyington was,
off
don't
of
we?
Ball. He was a prisoner of war there. And he was in the Flying Tigers, and he said, "Don't tell anyone." He said, "The Japs find out I was in the Flying Tigers, they'll kill me." Claire Chennault's Flying Tigers. And there was a Flying Tiger by the name of Matt Kuykendall from San Saba, Texas. He was, I was related to him. And, but he was a Army Air Corps pilot, and he retired. He left the Army Air Corps. He was a P-40 pilot and joined the Flying Tigers. Most of them joined to make money. They're supposed to get $500 for each Jap plane they shot down. And he asked me if I was related to him, this and that. And we got to be real good friends and everything.
So you got to be real good friends with Pappy Boyington while you were POW.
Yes.
What kind of guy was he?
When he was in prison camp, he was real good, and he told me, he said, "There's one thing these Japs have done." He was very blunt with me. He said, "There's one thing these Japs have done for me. He said, they've sobered me up. He was a heavy drinker.
No sake for him in the POW camp, huh?
Well, he was a heavy drinker, and he was known for that, and he was unconventional, and I never met anyone else like him, but he was saving most of the cigarettes I gave him and stashing them away, and he was going out in what the Japs call a benjo, which was the head, the latrine, the benjo, the Japs called it, and he'd smoke in there, and they caught him doing it. And they took him out and lined him up out there and fell all the prisoners of war out. Lined them up at attention in front of him, and they had made us a homemade baseball. They wanted us to play baseball. They were crazy about baseball. We were too weak to play baseball. And they worked him over in the stern. But he took it real well. And one of the Jap, we call the Conca Joe. That was Japanese for pharmacist mate, Conca Joe. He used to really enjoy cutting on Americans, operating, taking bomb fragments out or something like that. He come back there. The Japanese couldn't pronounce my last name. They called me Kendall. He come back there and he said, Kendall, and hit me right in the side of the head. I don't know. He may have thought I was giving Borington my cigarettes. I don't know. They stopped giving them to me.
He may have thought that. We're going to have to stop right there, Mr. Kuykendall, and take a short break. Don't go away. More here of Local Heroes. Welcome back to Local Heroes here on WKFK TV7. We're talking to Mr. Cliff Kuykendall. Mr. Kuykendall, when we left off in our last segment, you were talking about Pappy Borington and knowing him. But let's get you out of that interrogation camp. Where did the Japanese send you, and what were they making you do while you were POW?
They sent me to a Japanese labor camp run by the Japanese Army. The name of the labor camp was Ashio, A-S-H-I-O. It was located in a place called Salito, A-S-L-I-T-O Mountains. And we worked in an underground copper mine, which the copper mine had been closed down as being non-productive before World War II started. But the Japanese were hurting so much for raw materials, they reopened it with slave labor. And we worked 10-hour shifts, and we worked 8 days straight and got 2 days off. And of course, when the Americans started bombing the Japanese mainland, B-29s, we could see them from a distance, and we could hear them at night flying over and this and that. If the Japs saw us looking at an American plane, they would clobber us, hit us, beat us up. But on August the 15th, 1945, they didn't send us to work. And they increased our rations of barley, and back then we was eating barley. They called it corn. It was grown in Korea, and they called it corn. And we'd gone down to grasshopper soup and tree leaves, and they increased our ration. We knew something was up, and we were. B-29 flew over several days later and opened both bomb bays and dropped the slats out of the bomb bays loaded down with food, American food, canned food, into the side of a hill right near the camp. We knew the war was over. And we were liberated September the 5th. And we were loaded up on a train and sent down to Yokohama and turned over to the American forces. And I remember going through Tokyo and Yokohama, and it just level, burned out. And a few days after arriving in Yokohama, I was taken to the airport there at Sugi Aerodrome, and I was loaded on Navy transport and flown to Guam. And I was on Guam for a couple of weeks at a place called Camp Dealey Rest Camp, and then I was flown back to the States, winding up in Oak Knoll Naval Hospital at Oakland, California. And from there, I had to go to Washington, D.C. to be interviewed by an admiral, a rear admiral, whose son-in-law was on the Tullabee. A Lieutenant Wilson, who was an engineering officer, was married to Rear Admiral H.C. Train's daughter, and he wanted to know what happened and everything, his daughter and whatnot. I was still wearing Navy Seabee clothes I'd been issued on Guam. I was walking the streets in Washington, D.C. in Navy Seabee clothes. No one ever said anything. And I had this admiral turned over this yeoman, a young woman, but I forget her name. I remember she was a Polish girl. She was in Pennsylvania, and she was my escort. And of course, everything was above board. And I finally told her, I said, please get some orders cut on me. I want to go to the Navy hospital nearest my home. I'm sick. And she got orders for me, and I was transferred to the United States Naval Hospital at Norman, Oklahoma. The Navy had a hospital there then. And that was near my home, and I stayed there a while. And I was given 90 days rehab leave. Went home to Wichita Falls, Texas for 90 days.
How did it feel to get back into the United States?
They flew me back.
But how did it feel when you finally got back to the States? I mean,
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's worth fighting for.
Yes, sir, it is. And you said you were sick. How long did it take you to recover from? I'm sure you had several illnesses.
Well, malnourishment was the main cause. When I was captured, I weighed 160 pounds, and I'm only 5'9". I weighed 160 pounds in excellent physical condition. I was only 19 years old when I was captured. I spent my 21st birthday as a prisoner of war. And when I was liberated, I was weighed on Guam, and I weighed 90 pounds. 90-pound weakling. And I made a mistake by going out and partaking of some alcoholic beverages when I was in Oak Knoll Naval Hospital a while, and there with a couple of Marines wanted me to go with them, and I come in, got sick, and I wasn't able to get to the head, and a Navy nurse come back there with a pan. And after a while, she says, Kuykendall, what have you been doing? What have you been drinking? I said, a few highballs, ma'am. And she said, did you know you had the worms? I said, no, I didn't know I had them, but I'm not surprised with the diet I've been on. And I still had them in Washington. And when that submarine was lost, all of my upper teeth were knocked out except 5. I don't know what hit them, maybe binoculars. And when I arrived at the Navy Hospital in Norman, one of the first things I told them about my worm condition, and they cured me. They gave me proper medication, and they cured me. And they fixed up my teeth too.
And you got something good to eat, I hope.
Well, it's a good thing I was on a soft diet when I was POW, because soft diet's about all I could handle. I was wearing a pair of heavy binoculars around my neck, and I believe that the concussion blew them up hit me in the mouth and knocked out my teeth. My bottom teeth were not harmed. It's just my upper teeth. I wound up with an upper partial plate.
Well, Cliff, you're here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi for a very special event, and you're the guest of honor for a memorial service that's going to be conducted at the Tullabee Memorial, which is the memorial that was, the Tullabee was assigned to the Mississippi to memorialize submarine veterans. And I can't think of a better person to be there as the guest of honor. And how do you feel about coming back and seeing this memorial? I know you've been here before, but how does it feel to come back and to be here and to memorialize your shipmates who were lost virtually right in front of you.
I feel very humble and very honored. I'm very honored. I grieve over my lost shipmates, 79 of them, but it's something I've had to live with. And fortunately, I've always been able to live with them, and I've never had to see a psychiatrist or anything like that. And I've never suffered battle fatigue. And someone told me a long time ago, don't keep it pinned up on the inside of you. Get rid of it. Talk about it. You'll be better off. And that's what I've always done. And it's something I'm just able to live with, and I don't mind discussing it, and I feel it's the least I can do. When I'm being honored, I'm honoring all my other shipmates that was on that submarine and went down with it. And I only wish that each and every one of them was here with me.
Well, you've got some pretty vivid memories of them. I mean, you told me who was there and who you remembered. Do you still see a lot of them when you reflect on this? Do you have many days when you sit back and you think about this and what happened to you? And
some things stand out just like it happened yesterday, and other things I have forgotten. And some of the faces I still remember. I still remember what they look like and all of that. I still remember Hardy because when I was walking down the steps of the administration building at New London, Connecticut with my orders to report to Mare Island, California, Hardy was walking up the steps, the one that put in for sub-duty the same time I did, and he said, "Hey, Cliff, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Mare Island, California." And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, I'm starting sub school." Well, I saw Hardy one time after that. We were tied up alongside a tender, and the USS Flyer come in and tied up alongside of us, and Hardy was on it, and he was a coxswain then. He was a coxswain, and he put the Flyer in commission. I believe he was built the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. Well, unfortunately, the Flyer was going through a strait in the Dutch East Indies or somewhere out there and hit a Japanese mine and sunk. And Hardy bunked in the after torpedo room. I don't know where he bunked. And there were a few survivors off the Flyer, but he was one of them.
Mr. Kuykendall, we've come to the end of the show, but I want to give you my heartfelt thanks for your service to the country and coming and sharing your story with us. And it is a tremendous honor to have met you and to have talked to you. Thank you very much for being here on Local Heroes. We appreciate it very much. That's it for this show. Join us again next week for another edition of Local Heroes here on WKFK TV.